Welcome back to the channel. We're going to talk about Roundhill and their distributions today, and we're going to talk about Yieldmax and their distributions and how this affects my portfolio and my testing. We'll go through everything, so stay tuned. So my last video I did about Roundhill and gave my predictions. December 20th, I had XDTE at 20 cents, QDTE at 23 cents, and RDT at 25 to 26 cents. They came out with XDTE sitting at 64 cents, QDTE sitting at 86 cents, and RDTE right there at that 26 cents. So what happened? What changed everything? And I'm going to point you to a video up above back November 8th. I told you on November 8th, or I had expressed to you that in that video on November 8th, that something occurred. And I told you then what was going to happen. The comments was, they have 8 weeks to make this all pan out. Well, guess what? Now they're down to 2 weeks. And it's happening this week. So they didn't do what I would have thought they had done. They decided to make it all one big distribution at the end of the year. And here is how it plays out. Back on November 7th, they sold 4 poor man cover calls. Showed it to you in the data. I expressed to you during that video that they were going to have to pay you out the gain. And what do I mean by that? So let me try to explain this in a slightly different term. So when they purchase the poor man cover call, there's a certain price that they pay for that. When they have to sell one of those poor man cover calls, and that's how they create their synthetics, is through that poor man cover call, or the PMCC, just the initials for poor man cover call. When they sell that cover call to either pay for something or redeem shares or cover the expenses of going through the strike price, there's a lot of reasons that they may have to sell one of these poor man cover calls. This isn't a roll. This is them selling them. This is not a term of they could, they have to pay you out. Just like any other ETF. Just like anything else. So I don't understand why people get upset, because they're going to have to pay you those gains, or at least 90% of those gains. That's what I don't understand. This is not news. This is not a news flash. Other fund managers have told you this is what happens when this occurs. So let's look at the data. They sold that on November 7th. You can go back from those November 7th and look at the NASDAQ and see. You can see from the date that they started, there's very few times that they could have bought that poor man cover call that was actually more expensive. Looking at that, they had to sell it, those 4, at a profit, which means they have to distribute those profits to you. Now, QDTE and XDTE have plenty of money sitting on the sideline to pay you out these distributions. Right now, QDTE has $3.43 sitting in their account ready to pay you. XDTE has $4.48 sitting in the account ready to pay you. So going forward, if they go through the strike or somebody redeems some shares, they can afford not to have to sell one of the poor man cover calls. But if somebody sells a significant amount of shares getting in and out, then that may force them to sell a poor man's cover call. So if we look at XDTE and the price per share, you see how far it's going to end up dropping. And this was about midday today, but at the end of the day, it's not going to drop that far, and they're only distributing profits that they received back to you. QDTE, the exact same thing. They're going to have to distribute those profits back into you. Now, I did not catch when they sold any of their poor man cover calls on XDTE, but there was a lot of weeks that there was inflows, but no additional strikes were being purchased. So they may or may not have sold one, and I wouldn't have known. I don't track that on a daily basis. I just don't. I don't worry about them selling them or not selling them because I know that they're going to pay us those profits. Nothing wrong with them paying us those profits. If I look at what this does to their current share price and where they are at compared to the S&P 500, and I'm comparing them to the Qs, I see that this is going to cause them to have a little dip. Not a huge dip, just a little dip. Now, QDTE is definitely going to be closer to that 10% below the starting point for the NAV, and XDTE is going to be right there breaking even. But, and I turn right back around and say but, if you look at total returns, QDTE is beating QQQQ. XDTE is beating the S&P 500. For those people that want to be able to take 100% of the money and never have to worry about NAV, then you need to step away from anything paying these yields closer to the 20% range or higher. They just don't really exist. Once you get above those 20% ranges, you're going to see a little bit of NAV erosion just because the calls get tapped out. They have to settle the calls. Other functions and mechanics of the actual funds and exchanges. This is no free lunch, but you're looking at funds paying you a high distribution rate every single week. And just because they mechanically have to do something due to regulations, then you shouldn't be upset or worried about it, or I don't know. I'm not worried about it, even though I do not have a significant amount of money in these except for my testing that I'm doing on Roundhill versus Yieldmax. But this doesn't bother me. This is the same conversations that I have to have every day with a lot of people about why are you worried about 1% NAV erosion when they're paying you 24, they're paying you 35, they're paying you 35% and you expect no NAV erosion. I'm at loss for words because those mechanics of cover calls and mechanics of synthetics and there's mechanics of all these functions that goes involved. And I've tried to explain it to everybody, but obviously from the post I saw this first thing this morning when I woke up, clearly somebody doesn't understand what happens through the mechanics of these funds. It's mechanically set up this way. If I look at distributions this week for Yieldmax, I see my MSTR is going to pay $3.08 and my SQY is going to pay 65 cents. Those are the two that I'm in. You can see the rest of them that are out there. I'm doing fairly well in this test. I still feel that you could build a better fund than the Dorsey funds, even though I'm going to give them this. It adds a new fund to Group A that I might be able to swap out one of the lower funds for to give that a little more juice. So for my test, I love higher distributions. So Roundhill is going to get $12.84 this week on my original $1,000 investment. And my Yieldmax is going to get $14.57. 50% gets diverted to other funds, 50% gets reinvested into the original fund, and we'll see how this plays out for us. I'm going to give you a little update of where we are with these. If I look at Roundhill, slightly up a couple dollars. My BTCI is growing ever so slowly. My Claws, which is a CLO, is breaking even, but I'm into these for the long haul, just to see how they play out, and can we build out other funds using Roundhill and using Yieldmax. If I look at Yieldmax, and clearly I've picked some funds that are up, some funds that are down. Out of the new Dorsey Wright, I picked 4 out of their 5. I think I'm doing fairly well. I know that Misty's going to pay me. I know SQY is going to pay me. And I'll be able to invest back into BTCI and Claws and continue to build those out over time. So a couple years from now, they'll be worth something. Now, you could take this exact same experiment and take my $1,000 and times it by 10 if you had $10,000. It's all up to you how you perceive this. If you put $100,000 in there, you would be up. You can see exactly how this would play out. You just have to times it by 10 or 100 or whatever the amount of money that you're willing to put in there. In retirement, I'm just not willing to put a whole lot of money in these. I'm only trying to build out some funds and see how this works out. I think it's a great experiment. It's kind of fun. It gives me something to do on certain days of the week. Get up to go make my purchases. But so far, you can see how they're doing. Hopefully this explains why Roundhill made a large distribution. Shows you how my Yieldmax versus Roundhill is doing. And I will see you in the next video. Until next time, God bless.